Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Bong-seok Cha, Investment Manager at Australian Trade and Investment Commission in Korea, responsible for hydrogen energy sectors. And I'm taking the role of MC for the workshop today. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to this inaugural Australia-Korea Hydrogen Industry Workshop, and thank you all for joining us. Now, let me invite Mr. Ron Green to provide his opening remarks. Mr. Ron Green is a Trade Commissioner at Australian Trade and Investment Commission in Korea, responsible for resource and energy sector, including hydrogen. Ron?
Thanks, Bong-seok. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, initially, first of all, I'd like to extend my welcome to Dr. Kwon, General Director, Business Coordination Centre at H2Korea, who are co-hosting this event with us. We also have our guest speakers, Ms. Edith Musi, for Business Development Manager for South Australian Government, Department of Trade and Investment, Ms. Carolyn Cherry, Executive Director, Infrastructure Planning and Economic Development, WA, West Australian State Government, Mr. Tim Stock, Project Director, Hydrogen and Clean Energy, New South Wales State Government, Department of Planning, and Mr. Andrew Broadbent, Director, Queensland State Government Industry Development Department of State Development, Infrastructure and Local Government and Planning. And I would also like to welcome AustCham, the AustCham team, Rowan here, who has assisted us in some of the logistics and event preparation. Welcome, Rowan. The fact that we have over 100 attendees present today from 30 Korean companies and 23 organisations indicates that these events are important. It's just 3 months exactly since we held our first Hydrogen Roundtable in Korea. This event was co-hosted by Australia's Ambassador Raper and Chairman Moon from H2Korea. At the April Roundtable, we proposed a series of workshops to be held quarterly because the H2 hydrogen ecosystems in Korea and Australia are evolving rapidly. Dissemination of information is still ad hoc, and face-to-face communication is needed but cannot happen with borders closed. The themes of the workshops will reflect emerging issues and opportunities. I anticipate we'll need to have a session on the important Guarantee of Origin certification scheme that will underpin the clean hydrogen trade. Future themes of workshops will include R&D and carbon capture and storage opportunities. Recent developments by the Australian Government include a new budget allocation of $565 million for low-emission technology partnerships and initiatives with key trading and strategic partnerships. President Moon and Prime Minister Morrison also met at the G7 in Cornwall and agreed to progress a Korea-Australia low-emissions technology partnership. Following our Trade Minister Tian's meeting with the Korean Minister for Trade, Moo-hee-yoo, on Monday, 19th of July, that's only last week, we're hoping to conclude the partnership agreement by the G20 summit on the 30th to the 31st of October. We expect this will lead to industry-led demonstration projects leveraging both private and government funding. So stay tuned for developments in this area. Today we'll hear from the state governments of South Australia, West Australia, New South Wales and Queensland about their hydrogen strategies, what they can do to assist our partnerships with Korea. The workshops will allow time for a Q&A, and if we run out of time, written answers will be circulated along with the presentations. At the round table in April, you heard from Boston Consulting Group that is advising the Korean government. At our next workshop on November the 10th, Boston Consulting Group, or H2Korea, will report back on their review of the competitive advantages of different global hydrogen production sites, including relative cost, environmental impact, and synergy with Korea. The remaining states and territories will also report on the hydrogen strategies. So please, stay tuned and try to attend the second workshop on November the 10th. So with these introductory comments, I would now like to pass back to Bong-seok.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Okay, now let me invite Dr. Kwon Na-kyun to provide his welcome remarks. Dr. Kwon is an Executive Director of H2Korea, responsible for Business Coordination Center. Dr. Kwon?
Thank you, Mr. Cha. Good afternoon. I'm Na-kyun, General Director of Australia. First of all, I'm honored to give a welcoming remark at the meaningful workshop to expand the hydrogen industry cooperation between Australia and Korea. I would like to thank Trade Commissioner Longreen and the Austrade officials for organization the event today. And I want to special thanks to all the officials from South Australia, West Australia, New South Wales, and Queensland state government to share vision and strategy for hydrogen industry of each state. Australia is rich in natural resources and has an excellent climate for renewable energy production, so it is considered to be a highly valuable as a highly producer. Also, hydrogen technology cooperation with Korea is expected as is a highly technology skill, such as hydrogen fuel cell and gas production. Korea has the world's best technology in hydrogen mobility and high technology in the fuel cell power generation, hydrogen infrastructure, and hydrogen safety technology. I believe that if the two countries cooperate for the development of a hydrogen industry, it will be an opportunity to grow together in the future global hydrogen market. Australia has been a long-standing ally of Korea since signed LOI on hydrogen cooperation in 2019. And today's event will help to compound the potential of two countries and move toward a more advanced stage of cooperation. I hope that today's event will serve as an opportunity to gain better insight on hydrogen industry in Australia for hydrogen companies so that the hydrogen cooperation between the two countries will be more advanced. Okay, thank you. Once again, thank you everyone for attending the event and hope you all have a meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Kwon. And after the presentation session, we will have a question and answer session moderated by Mr. Rowan Petz, the Executive Director of Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea. And all of the participants are most welcome to send your questions to us using a chatting box that you can find at bottom right of the screen. Lastly, the second Australia-Korea Hydrogen Industry Workshop is scheduled for 10th November this year. At the second workshop, for your information, we are planning to have a chance to hear about Korean government's progress in its overseas hydrogen supply chain development project. Now, let me start today's presentation session by inviting Edith Much, Business Development Manager, South Australian State Government Department for Trade and Investment. She will talk about renewable hydrogen future in South Australia. Edith, please.
Before I start my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm giving my presentation today and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. Before going to the topical part of my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge Ron Green, Senior Trade Commissioner, and his team to organize this workshop series, Dr. Kwon, General Director of H2Korea, Rowan Petz for the continuous support he's providing for us, and of course the fellow speakers from other states and territories of Australia to showcase the Australian capabilities together, and all the audience, ladies and gentlemen, who take their time to be with us today. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be involved today, and my aim is to give an overview how South Australia can contribute to the nation hydrogen vision and what developments are happening in our state. I'm excited to share what South Australia is doing to advance the clean hydrogen. We're all aware of that the Council of Australian Governments, the co-export industry and opportunity could be the hydrogen. But what's really happening in our state? So South Australia has one of the highest uptake of renewables in the world. This slide shows really of all our proudness that we have the solar, the wind, and the storage capacity. As a state, we are fortunate to have world-class wind and solar resources. And we can say that we are a home of one of the highest penetration of variable renewable energy generation in the world. It's now well over 60% based on the details from 2020. We have one of the highest uptake of solar PV in the world. So the world's original and most famous big battery is also in the States. So we so-called it the Hornsdale, the Tesla big battery. We are a home to one of the most distributed energy system in the world. So with 1 in 3 homes and 1 in 3 businesses with solar PVs, with over 1 kilowatt installed per capita. We have a very vibrant virtual power plant market, including the world's largest virtual power plant partnership with Elon Musk. We are very proud that we have currently the largest electrolyzer in Australia, the 1.25 megawatt electrolyzer at the Hyperscape project. I will give some details later on my presentation. And as of early July, the South Australian Hydrogen Technology Cluster has been formed as official association. And this is one of the 13 regional hydrogen technology cluster funded by NERA. NERA is the National Energy Resources Australia, and this cluster is the South Australian base of hydrogen technology collaboration and supply chain innovation. But I can also tell what we are not. So we are not a home to any nuclear, large-scale hydro or coal-fired power generation project anymore. I just mentioned that we have world-class wind and solar resources, which really activate investment to renewables in South Australia. Having massive solar and wind resources means that renewable resources are almost always available. When the sun is not shining, it's windy. When it's not windy, there's a very high likelihood of sunny conditions. The irradiance level of across the state exceeds 23.5 megajoules per square meter, and the wind capacity factors accessing 45%. This is terrific. An overlay of South Australia's solar and wind resources shows that only in South Australia and southwest of Western Australia can you find co-located natural resources on offer. Co-located means when there's solar reserves and there's wind resources. This natural infrastructure enabled us to lead the way for the country in terms of clean energy generation and the transition of our economy towards to a low carbon future. Since 2003, when South Australia's first large-scale wind farm was commissioned, we have witnessed many world feats during our clean energy transitions. South Australia is working towards to net zero carbon emission by 2050, and Australia is working to reduce carbon dioxide emission between 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by the year of 2030. We believe that we can secure a cleaner yet still reliable energy future by using renewable or carbon neutral gas such as hydrogen. On the slide, you can see a pyramid, which means a project in the pipelines. We already invested project more than 7 billion, and there's another 20 billion in the pipeline, but it's still more room to invest in renewable projects. On the next slide, you can see the stunning transformation. We went from 1% to 71% renewables just in 15 years, which means that currently we are the second ranking all over the world by renewable energy generation. We are absolutely on track for net 100% renewables by 2030, but our target is even bigger because our target is 500% renewables by 2050. So let's go to the hydrogen topic, what we did and how we get to there where we are now. So South Australia's hydrogen journey began in 2017 with our green hydrogen study and the green hydrogen roadmap, and the government commenced engagement activities with International Association for Hydrogen Safety. This was followed in 2019 by the South Australia Hydrogen Action Plan, with the vision for South Australia to become a world-class hydrogen supplier, which importantly demonstrates bipartisan support for hydrogen from both sides of politics in South Australia. Hydrogen allows the world to rethink it generates and stores energy, how it powers transport, fleets, heats homes. But for South Australia, our vision goes beyond just power and fuel. We believe that we can become a clean hydrogen supplier of choice for our trading partners from all over the world who are seeking to decarbonize their economies, and we can have green and net zero carbon hydrogen operation by 2025. The Asia-Pacific region is the most populated region in the world, home to 4 billion people and with some of the world's largest economies, which means that the International Renewable Energy Agency also said that the region accounts for more than half of the global consumption for energy, with 85% of its regional consumption from fossil fuels. With demand rising due to the rapid urbanization.
네네.
Yes?
지금 유튜브 소리는 나기 시작했고요. 이거 확인하고 꺼도 되나요? 잠시만요. 요거는 지금 잘 나오고 있고, 얘는
Sorry, Edith, you're still around.
잠시만요. 이거 한번 다시 들어가 볼게요.
Please, we'll just try to mute this person. I'm sorry for interrupting, Edith.
No, that's all right. Perfectly fine. That's fine.
Thank you. Please continue. Thank you.
That's all right. So I just thought that with the demand rising due to rapid urbanization and industrialization, there are considerable opportunities for clean energy. Our proximity to the Asia-Pacific region presents us with significant opportunities, and the region looks at now to transition to a hydrogen economy and challenges to face to do so. Our onshore solar and wind is already being leveraged, but there's still room to develop more, with over 60% of our energy needs currently being supported by clean energy. Our state has estimated a 55 gigawatts of potential developable onshore wind resources and an indicative capacity of excess 45%, as I just mentioned earlier in my presentation. One of the challenges facing many countries in the development of clean hydrogen is the ability to produce required amount of cheap renewable energy, which allow to generate and produce clean hydrogen. I have a good news. This is not a problem in South Australia. We have clean energy. We have cheap clean energy. We have the cheapest clean energy at this point in time. We have significant mass and land and world-class wind and solar resources. And as I said before, our aspiration are to reach net 100% renewable energy generation by 2030. The tipping point for renewable hydrogen, I must highlight it again and again, is the reduced cost of solar and wind, which we are creating a viable and much needed carbon-free energy carrier. Significant milestone in South Australia hydrogen journey has been launch of the South Australian Government Hydrogen Action Plan, and it outlines 20 actions across 5 themes and objectives. After the South Australian Hydrogen Action Plan, one of the key deliverables of the action plan was a hydrogen export modeling tool. This tool was 1.25 million project because the project contained a feasibility study, a pre-feasibility study, a production of an online tool, and the prospectus to inform establishment of an international scale clean hydrogen export value chain opportunities from South Australia. For any companies who are interested in investment opportunities in South Australia, the hydrogen export modeling tool and the prospectus aim to assist potential opportunities and information. The tool combines spatial mapping, technical specification, and commercial modeling. So it can create a secure web-based interface, what is in the tool, and you can add all your own layers. The tool enables potential investors to quickly and efficiently assess different supply chain configurations, such as production locations, export inputs like water, power, and land. It handles the cost of electricity, the capital cost of electrolyzers, export volume and product. It includes the ammonia as well, not just the gaseous hydrogen, the liquefied hydrogen, or any liquid organic hydrogen carrier commodities. And the tool able to provide the result in a comprehensive report. The tool is free of charge, and the only thing you should do if you wish to access gain access to the tool is drop an email, maybe to me or to the hydrogen@sa.gov.au, and just quickly describe who you are and why would you like to use the tool. The Department for Energy Mining foster cared and funded the project, and they are collecting details for the users. The tool is accessible to all international clean hydrogen investors, so there's no eligibility criteria who can access the tool and who's not. I mentioned before that I will talk about a bit later on the project, and this slide summarizes the 5 most important ongoing projects in South Australia. These are all in the public domains, but we have other projects in the pipeline, industrial scale production project. But let me give an overview on the ongoing project. The Australian Gas Network Hydrogen Park project is a 14.5 million demonstration project, including a 4.9 million grant funding from the SA government. And this project has currently the largest electrolyzer in Australia, the 1.25 megawatt PEM electrolyzer. The facility is capable of producing 20 kilograms of hydrogen per hour, which supplies more than 700 homes greener gas, because the produced hydrogen, a part of the produced hydrogen is blended to the local gas network up to 5% by volume, and the remaining hydrogen is delivered, transported to neighbouring states and South Australia for industrial users via tracks. But there's still opportunity for hydrogen offtake from the project. The second project I like to talk about is Neoen Crystal Brook Energy Park. In 2018, Neoen commenced a feasibility study supported by the South Australian government to investigate the technical and economic feasibility of co-locating hydrogen facility with Neoen's permitted Crystal Brook Energy Park site, which combines wind, solar and battery energy storage system. The site was capable of producing 25 tons of hydrogen per day. The key findings of the feasibility study has been recently released, last week exactly, so I encourage everyone to read it through. Neoen also considering opportunities for large-scale production facility for export supplied by nearby the Goida renewable zones. Neoen is a very innovative company, and they are continuing to work closely with local, national, and international governments and stakeholders to secure off-takers for hydrogen that would be produced in South Australia. This is one of the key in proceeding beyond the feasibility assessment stage. The Eyre Peninsula Gateway project is the next project I like to talk about. This is being developed by H2U, Hydrogen Utility Company. And the Eyre Peninsula Gateway project will integrate a 100 megawatt electrolysis plant and 120 tons per day ammonia synthesis plant, which will represent Australia's largest integrated hydrogen and green ammonia facility. A total production capacity is up to 40,000 tons of green ammonia per year. And when the project commences in 2023, it will be the largest green ammonia production plant in the world. The project will be later extended to the export stage with a 1.5 gigawatt of electrolysis plant designed to drive further exports to green ammonia. The carbon capture and storage, just jumping to the next project by Santos, the carbon capture and storage is a critical enabler for zero emission hydrogen. Santos has a natural competitive advantage in delivering zero emissions from the Cooper Basin. The Moomba carbon capture and storage project is the second largest such project globally with the lowest cost of less than 30 Australian dollar per ton over the life cycle cost, and the pathway further to lowering the cost. Santos project is FID ready, final investment decision ready, subject to Australian carbon credit unit eligibility, with a CO2 injection trial to prove injectivity, as well as the front-end engineering design now complete together with the internal assurance. The cost reviews and the project development now is in the advanced stage. Santos and its project.
Sorry, you have only 1 minute left. So time to conclude your presentation.
Okay. So this is Santos project. Invest in South Australia. It's really just a summary for you. Why South Australia? Why South Australia is a good place to invest? The big focus for the South Australian government in the energy and resources sector is driving the development of a hydrogen export chain in Australia. We have world-class renewable resources. We have integrated clean energy network. Our vision is to have a multiply export-scale hydrogen production facilities for liquid hydrogen, ammonia, liquid organic hydrogen carrier like MCH. We have a very strong community support. 97% of the Australians desire renewables as their main source of energy. We have a very supportive investor environment. We have a one window to government, which offers case management for potential investors. As I don't have too much time, I would share two contact details. We have a state representative in South Korea. Please feel free to contact MJ or myself. You can see our contact details at the end of my presentation, and some of them still have links on the bottom of the page.
Okay, thanks, Edith. Now, I would like to invite Caroline Cherry to talk about the Western Australia's renewable hydrogen industry and vision. Caroline Cherry is Western Australia State Government's Executive Director for Infrastructure, Planning and Economic Development. Caroline, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the organisers Austrade and H2Korea for organising the workshop today, and also recognition of my state colleagues who will also be speaking today. And apologies if you guys hear similar comments from each of the jurisdictions, because it does cut across quite a lot of us. As mentioned, I'm Caroline Cherry. I'm the Executive Director of Infrastructure, Economic and Planning and Economic Development. So my area looks after the implementation of the WA State Government's renewable hydrogen strategy, which is what I'll be talking to today. So Western Australia has a renewable hydrogen strategy. This was released in July 2019. This sets out the vision mission for Western Australia as a renewable hydrogen state. So we are looking to become a significant producer, user and exporter of renewable hydrogen. The strategy sets out 4 strategic focus areas that Western Australia is looking at. It is export, hydrogen blending in natural gas networks, remote applications and transport. As you can see from the slide, we've got goals which we are seeking to achieve by 2022 and goals to achieve by 2030 in each of these strategic focus areas. I'd just like to draw your attention to our 2030 goal, which is that Western Australia is looking to become a global leader in hydrogen export, and we are hoping that our global share is similar to our current share in LNG today. So we are one of the top LNG exporters, and we hope to be one of the top hydrogen exporters as well. Similar to South Australia, Western Australia has a lot of natural advantages. We have vast land mass, so we have around 2.5 million square kilometres of land here in Western Australia. So that's probably around about 25 South Koreas, if you'd like to put it in that context, which is quite a large land mass. We have some of the highest solar irradiance in the world, and also our wind factor and capacities are quite high as well, so up to around about 50%. Much of the land also happens to be co-located in some of the sunniest and windiest, so we have both, similar to South Australia. So when the sun goes down, the wind keeps blowing, so there is a potential for renewable energy generation almost 24 hours a day here. We are also near some of the key complementary infrastructure and resources here in Western Australia. For example, the Pilbara region in the northwest of Western Australia, which is sort of up here. It averages more than 10 hours a day of sunshine and is officially the sunniest region in Australia. It is also home to much of Australia's mining and oil and gas industries, with supporting infrastructure such as the Port of Dampier bulk liquid berth. We see real opportunities for the development of a hydrogen hub in this region, which would include the potential for the production of green steel here in the Pilbara in Western Australia. Other locations in WA have up to 50% wind factor capacities as well. Much of our great wind potential lies on the coastal regions of Western Australia and southwest, with wind speeds above 7.5 metres per second. WA is also fortunate that our good wind resources also actually extend inland as well. So for instance, the Midwest and Gascoyne regions here in Western Australia, you'll find many of our wind farms which are already there, and also a lot that are being planned into the future as well. We are also home to some of the well-established infrastructure connections, including world-class ports. Ports such as Port Hedland, Ashburton, and the previously mentioned Port Dampier. So they're well-known and reliable logistics hubs for shipping of vast amounts of iron ore, LNG, and other commodities to South Korea, as well as around the globe. Being located relatively close to Asia means our shipping distance to South Korea at its closest is around 3,650 nautical miles, or about 8 days of travel. We feel these established routes will support and accelerate the growth of our hydrogen export vision. WA also has the necessary skills and expertise in building new large-scale industry, notably with the LNG export industry and also the renewable energy sector here in Western Australia. We are now the world's second largest exporter of LNG, accounting for more than 13% of share of global exports. Arriving at this position took decades of commitment to a vision, learning from experience, and a willingness of industry and government to work together, and leveraging the connection between domestic and export opportunities. This expertise is now being applied to growing Western Australia hydrogen sector and future hydrogen hubs in our region. On this slide, it's a map of Western Australia. It currently shows the number of proposals and projects that we are currently aware of in relation to Western Australia. This is mainly around our renewable hydrogen, but noting that we also have opportunities around blue hydrogen from our natural gas resources as well. A number of the projects that are on the map are successful recipients of Western Australian Renewable Hydrogen Fund and have received government grant funding. Through our fund, grant recipients are obliged to provide public knowledge sharing reports on their work, and this is then made publicly available for people to have a look at on the WA government website. We currently have 2 finalised reports available now, with a few more being completed this month as well. I'd like to now take the opportunity to quickly cover 3 significant projects here in Western Australia. They are Asian Renewable Energy Hub, the Yuri Green Ammonia Project, and the Clean Energy Innovation Park. So AREA, as we sort of term it over here, is located in East Pilbara between Port Hedland and Broome. This project has received environmental approval for its first stage, which is looking at 15 gigawatts. It is in the process of resubmitting their application to upgrade to their full-scale project size, which is looking at 26 gigawatts. So that application has just been submitted with our Environmental Protection Authority. This project, which is at around 6,500 square kilometres, has generated a significant amount of interest from major international companies and investors. It also has lead agency status through my department, which means we provide support and coordination for approvals processes and regulation within Western Australia. In July this year, AREA's team also announced another exciting large-scale renewable hydrogen proposal, which has been known as the Western Green Energy Hub. So this is actually in the southeast part of Western Australia. So they're aiming for an energy capacity of up to 50 gigawatts of upstream wind and solar. So we're very much looking forward to the development of this mega project and that energy proposal and the opportunities it will bring to generate with the local community and also as part of the international hydrogen value chain. Now, the Yuri Green Ammonia Project, this is Yarra Pilbara and Engie's Yuri Green Ammonia Project. It's a 10 megawatt electrolyser with on-site solar PVs, and this will be at Yarra Pilbara's fertiliser. So it's looking at replacing their current hydrogen processing, which is used through steam methane reforming from natural gas. They're going to be replacing that with renewable for that. It's currently up on the Burrup Peninsula, up far north in the Pilbara there. In May this year, that project received a significant boost from the Commonwealth Government through the Renewable Hydrogen Deployment Fund round. They received $42.5 million to help kickstart this project. Prior to this, the state government provided $2 million from the first round of its Renewable Hydrogen Fund. This facility will actually be one of the world's first industrial-scale renewable hydrogen production operations. So completion of this project is expected in 2023, pending a final investment decision towards the end of this year or early next year. The Clean Energy Innovation Park, or CEIP as we term it, is another successful recipient of that Commonwealth funding round. ATCO Australia's Clean Energy Innovation Park received a grant of $28.7 million to help towards the capital works of that project. It will be co-located with the 180 megawatt Warradargi wind farm, which is in the Midwest region here in Western Australia. The project involves a 10 megawatt electrolyser, generating up to 4.3 tonnes of renewable hydrogen per day. A final investment decision is anticipated on this project in early 2022, with commissioning commencing in 2023. This project was also a successful recipient of the Western Australian Renewable Hydrogen Fund. We provided funding for their feasibility study, which also provided them the ability to apply for the Commonwealth funding for this project. So our government's investment to date. So the Western Australian government has made significant investments into growing the renewable hydrogen industry here in the state. As I've mentioned, we've run 2 rounds of the Renewable Hydrogen Fund with a combined total for both funds of $15 million. The second round of that fund has closed. We are hopefully imminently going to be announcing successful recipients of that funding very soon. So happy to share the outcomes of that with anyone who is interested in those. We were also provided $3 million to undertake a massive regulatory reform package. So this legal framework review, which is currently underway, We'll tackle barriers and gaps that exist in the current legislative framework, providing clarity to increase investor confidence and also businesses' operating environments. We're also provided $2.7 million to expand the Renewable Hydrogen Unit, which is the team implementing the Renewable Hydrogen Strategy. That team has grown to about 6.5 staff here, hoping to support the rapidly emerging industry here in Western Australia. We were provided with $1 million towards identifying suitable locations for the geological storage of hydrogen. This will help to assist with projects looking towards export scale. So it will basically be looking at 2 phases to this piece of work. First phase is looking at a desktop review of onshore depleted oil and gas fields. From this, once fields have been identified, the next phase will be undertaking 3D static and dynamic modelling of those fields in order to ensure that we can actually utilise those fields as hydrogen storage. This will also provide those projects with the ability to be able to store in order for scale to export. We were provided with $1 million to undertake a detailed hydrogen value chain model. So this is looking at a whole raft of information, including the potential around domestic demand, the demand locations and potential for aggregation of that demand to assist with offtake contracts, to understand any impediments to the development of the industry here in Western Australia, and to identify any policy levers that government can pull in order to alleviate those. It's also looking at any infrastructure bottlenecks to determine potential funding models into the future as well. So that's looking at either government investment, private investment, or co-investment. The work that we're undertaking will also build on work that some of the other jurisdictions has undertaken, most notably what EDIT mentions before in regards to their export modelling tool as well. And lastly, we received some funding towards a study to hydrogen blending into our natural gas networks here in Western Australia. So that's considering the technical, economic and regulatory impacts of blending hydrogen into the natural gas networks here. Towards the end of last year, the WA government progressed a call for expressions of interest to develop a renewable hydrogen precinct within the Austrade Strategic Industrial Area. So this is an area that's about 20 kilometres north of a city called Geraldton in the Midwest region. We received 65 expressions of interest to that process, and that was from organisations across the world and throughout the hydrogen supply chain. And responses from that confirm that the Midwest region of WA will undoubtedly play a significant role in the development of an internationally competitive renewable hydrogen industry. To assist with that, in March this year, the government commenced the activation process by committing $7.5 million to help construct a central access road to the strategic industrial area. So informed by the responses from the expression of interest, government is now preparing a Austrade hydrogen activation plan to support the development of renewable hydrogen precinct and also establish other components of the hydrogen supply chain up there at Austrade and around Geraldton. Western Australia has also released its Renewable Hydrogen Roadmap. The Hydrogen Roadmap is a supporting document to the strategy itself. It outlines 26 initiatives that the Western Australian Government is driving to realise our vision and also achieve our goals here in Western Australia. A couple of the key initiatives, which I've already touched on, is the WA Renewable Hydrogen Fund, the regulatory and standards reform, but also part of our key role is building those relationships with industry, not just here in Western Australia and Australia, but also internationally as well. I just wanted to touch on a couple of our government priorities at the moment. So as we move into the next phase of growing the industry in WA, we're also committed to supporting renewable hydrogen projects of all sizes and scales and working on alleviating potential barriers. As I mentioned previously, we received some funding towards that at quite a substantial piece of work. Also in early 2021, after our state election, the Western Australian Government announced the Honourable Alana McTiernan as the state's first Minister for Hydrogen Industry. Minister McTiernan is deeply committed to WA's hydrogen industry, and her new ministerial role indicates our dedication to the industry, sending a strong signal as to how committed we are to supporting the development of Western Australian hydrogen. Acknowledging the increasing complexity of policy considerations, particularly in the areas of land tenure here and also energy policy, a concerted effort and coordination across government is underway to remove these barriers. We are continuing our economic and regulatory impact work through mechanisms such as regulatory sandboxing and also through our longer-term work with the Legal Frameworks Review. In regards to land tenure, projects like the Asian Renewable Energy Hub and Fortescue Future Industries aspirations will require huge tracts of land for renewable energy generation. Some of the projects are proposed are looking at land in the order of between 6,000 and 15,000 square kilometres. There are significant tracts of unallocated Crown land, but there's also a lot of competing land use here in Western Australia, such as pastoral leases and also mining tenure. Our Minister is currently leading work to provide some fast-track coordinated decision-making in this space, in particular considering new tenure options for renewable hydrogen projects. A couple of our other government priorities. We are also in the early stages of analysis for hydrogen common and multi-user infrastructure requirements in the most prospective renewable hydrogen production regions. This will include giving further consideration to, among other things, water desalination, water management, port and energy infrastructure requirements, and how to better facilitate third-party access to common user infrastructure. We're also undertaking some work around demand stimulation, which I mentioned previously, and that's also looking at aggregation of domestic demand. Industry is telling us that in order to kickstart their projects for commercial scale hydrogen production in Western Australia, we need good foundation domestic offtake customers here. This could be in the order of around 100 megawatts of initial demand and scaling up as the industry grows. We also know that there is growing interest in converting traditional diesel transport, such as rail and marine, to hydrogen, and longer term tackling potentially the aviation industry. We have real viable opportunities for hydrogen trucks and buses, pilot projects to drive stimulation and aggregation of some domestic demand. And this is where we're seeing a lot of international engagement, because Western Australia is very much at this stage a technology and also vehicle importer at this stage. As I mentioned previously, we're also undertaking a hydrogen value chain study to assist with identifying domestic demand opportunities for aggregation. In regards to investment attraction, in parallel, we are seeing a lot of excitement in the industry, but not a lot of capital risk available for these projects as yet. As such, we welcome Fortescue's ambitious plans to produce green hydrogen in the next 5 years and aim to decarbonise their mining operations and achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. The WA government has recently launched an intergovernment initiative to prepare an information package to investors that articulates the government's environment, social and governance credentials. This will very much align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are further opportunities that we're seeing also with renewable hydrogen. These are looking at building our local manufacturing capabilities. So renewable hydrogen, as it's in a sense, we are seeing a lot of demand for wind turbines, solar PVs, electrolyzers, so the potential for manufacturing or assembly or maintenance here in Western Australia is being explored, as well as the potential for downstream manufacturing, such as I mentioned before, green steel, green aluminium, and green cement as well. That's my presentation, and I'm pretty sure I have gone over time, but I would be more than happy to take any conversations and also introduce anyone to any of the projects that are currently here in Western Australia.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Actually, you are actually on time. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, let me invite Tim Stark to talk about New South Wales Hydrogen Vision. Tim is the project director for hydrogen and clean energy at the New South Wales State Government Department of Planning. Tim, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Ron and the Austrade and H2 teams. I think this is a critical, it's a critical juncture in the development of the hydrogen economy in Australia, but also in New South Wales, and really welcome this opportunity for this engagement. So I'm going to run through a little bit about what the New South Wales hydrogen, the size of the market opportunity. And I'll get, I've got my colleague from Investment New South Wales, Tim Wong, that will describe a little bit more on that opportunity, and then I'll really dive into what we're doing in terms of our policy thinking and really what our market engagement looks like and the types of stimulation that the government's trying to do in New South Wales to realise a hydrogen economy. So essentially, to start off in terms of the size of the potential hydrogen market in New South Wales, we really believe that heavy transport and the decarbonisation of that heavy transport fleet out to 2050 is critical, and a critical end use of hydrogen in a domestic sense. So you can see New South Wales has the largest heavy vehicle fleet in Australia, and we only anticipate that to grow. So we are considering that we'll have around at least 400,000 heavy vehicles, and importantly, out of this, we are already, as New South Wales government, looking to lead by example, and we recently announced that our 8,000 buses in our state fleet are looking to be net zero buses by 2030, and of course part of that is a hydrogen bus fleet. Next is our industrial heating and ammonia and steel and the heating sectors. So the reason I talk about this is really we have very large heavy industry and heavy manufacturing in New South Wales. We have the largest manufacturing base in Australia, and importantly, we have these heavy manufacturing bases in our port locations. So we have ammonia production at Newcastle, and we have steel production at Port Kembla. We also have our New South Wales gas consumption, which is 130 petajoules per year. And we have already announced an aspirational target of having a 10% hydrogen blending target by 2030. Some of the other work in terms of gas is we have just recently announced Australia's first dual fuel hydrogen capable gas peaker plant, and they have committed to purchasing 5% of their annual use in hydrogen. So really that is an initial offtake to help build a hydrogen hub in the Illawarra location. So that was a very quick, I will now pass over to Tim Wong just to dive in a little bit more detail into the types of opportunities that he is seeing from an investment perspective. So over to you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. And Tim, I'll just get you to drive as we move through the slides.
No problem.
Tim Wong, I'm from Investment New South Wales. We're the economic development arm of the state government, and we work across a lot of different agencies, including Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. Tim's department, Transport for New South Wales and Regional New South Wales. So we're very active on the commercial investment side. So next slide, Tim. Yes, so, back one. Our role is to drive investment into the state. A lot of that's foreign direct investment. We're responding to business needs for investors in general. We're trying to scale businesses to go global, and we're the single point of contact for investment opportunities in the state, whether they be inbound or local reinvestment opportunities. And we're marketing New South Wales, obviously, to the global stage as we're doing here this afternoon. Next slide, please. We're proactive in a number of sectors, and you can see them ranging from health, agriculture, into the area that I spend a lot of time in, which is clean economy. And one of the really important and very interesting areas is obviously hydrogen. And we're speaking to a great number of parties that want to do a range of different types of investments across the state. And in the next, if you move to the next slide, Tim. The way we help investors when they come into the state is that we provide things like market intelligence and highlight investment opportunities, which is much of our day-to-day work. We can provide support around business case development, and one that'll be of great interest to potential investors is we're identifying locations and potential partners, because being government, we have extensive networks and we're across most of the important parties in any given sector, and in the clean sector around hydrogen, along with Tim and other departments, we're across most of the major players. We'll do familiarisation visits and a range of other things. But I'll just jump into the next slide and look at some of the things, the areas that we're getting a lot of attention from. So these are kind of domestic opportunities, mostly around the transport sector. Tim already mentioned Transport for New South Wales Zero Emissions Bus Initiative, which will see 8,300 buses transition to zero emissions by 2030. So we're working with a whole range of manufacturers, suppliers in that space now. Some of them are also looking at commercial trucks beyond the buses, and there are a number of hydrogen players in there. So in terms of other areas where hydrogen is going to be really important in transport, we're getting inquiries from maritime applications, a lot of things around ferries at the moment. Even in aerospace, we're looking at fuel cell technology, which is suitable for those types of applications where weight is an issue, along fixed-wing aircraft and drones. We're very interested in parties that have fuel cell drivetrain technologies, particularly in the commercial truck and bus sector. In addition to that, we're seeking opportunities for people with skills and capabilities in fuel cell integration. There's not many people in the world that can do that. We know there's a lot of capabilities in Korea, so we'd be very much welcome any contacts or people interested in having a look at what we're doing here in the state. Hydrogen refueling equipment, electrolyzers. So that's more on the domestic transport side. Next slide, thanks, Tim. I'm going to talk about exports in a second, but before I do that, I just want to give some background to what we're doing in renewables in the state. One of New South Wales' key advantages is that we're the largest economy in the Commonwealth. We constitute just over a third of national GDP, and that's reflected in the size of our economy, our energy systems, our overall infrastructure. So right now we're going through a transition, and if you see the table there on the left, that gives you an indication of the amount of current generation that's coming off, and the red bars, horizontal red bars, show our renewable energy zones. So that's where we're going to deploy a lot of the wind and solar and firming capability, whether it be pumped hydro, solar. So currently we're estimating there's something like 32 billion Australian dollars of potential investment just in the renewable energy zones alone. And they're primarily designed to replace existing load. New South Wales is currently around a 20 gig generation capacity. So this is a way the state's ensuring that we've got reliable and cheap energy for New South Wales households and businesses. So the renewable energy zones are a central part of our planning, and the scale, I think, is very interesting for investors. So if we jump to the next slide, please, Tim. So that brings us to hydrogen opportunities and potentially around export opportunities. So I mentioned the renewable energy zones, and we have 3 of those that have been designated by the state government, and they will have large amounts of renewable energy in them, connected to high voltage infrastructure. The really good thing in New South Wales is we actually have a lot of really good high voltage infrastructure around a number of areas where you'd want to do hydrogen production through electrolyzers, primarily in the Hunter, where we have the Port of Newcastle, and also Port Kembla. And with the renewable energy zones, we're going to connect, enhance that high voltage and add tens of gigawatts of renewable energy. One thing that isn't on this map, we're also speaking to investors about the potential for a lot of offshore wind, maybe up to 7 or 8 gigs. Those discussions are still ongoing. So in terms of co-locating and the mix of renewable energy there's great scope for that for New South Wales for people thinking about hydrogen production. And we have 2 ports, I said, Newcastle and Port Kembla, with a lot of industrial capability around them if you're looking at doing electrolyser manufacturing and hydrogen generation. So we have some excellent infrastructure and opportunities there. Next slide, Tim. So I kind of covered off that a number of these points in terms of our competitive advantage, but I'll briefly touch on some of the more salient ones. Obviously, we're going to have access to cheap and abundant clean energy resources through our renewable energy zones. Given the size of the New South Wales economy, and Tim's doing a lot of work on the domestic front, large potential for domestic consumption. So for Korean companies interested in accessing those markets, there are a lot of opportunities there, and that will segue into future export markets. There's going to be funding for hydrogen and infrastructure technology projects. Tim will talk about that later. We're already doing hydrogen production at an industrial level. And there's a number of other attributes which makes New South Wales an interesting place to do hydrogen investment. So I'll hand back to Tim, and he's going to talk more about policy and programs.
I sure will. And just before I leave this, so thanks very much, Tim. I just wanted to reiterate, I suppose, some of the key things about this as well. As one is our deep water ports located in strategic locations with heavy manufacturing base. So building on what WA was saying earlier about that linkage of a domestic offtake to strategic location, which is you already got existing infrastructure that enables you to quickly scale up and access an export opportunity. So we already have that. We're looking at, and I'll run through a little bit of our policy thinking shortly. So it really is we also have an existing skilled workforce that is involved in heavy industry. We've got a well-defined and understood, especially in Newcastle, exporting commodities and exporting resource commodities has a natural strategic alignment within those locations. So that's in terms of where we're thinking. And this just gives a bit of the framework behind how we've got to where we've got, and really to show that while we don't necessarily, New South Wales is yet to release its final hydrogen strategy, we have done a significant amount of signalling and a significant amount of background work to make sure that we're going to get our policy settings and really be able to stimulate the right areas of the hydrogen economy. So first off, we set a 35% reduction in our emissions across New South Wales government by 2030 in our net zero plan. But importantly, we've doubled down on our commitment to be net zero by 2050 across the economy. We then, from that, derive this electrical infrastructure roadmap. This is really designed to provide, as Tim was saying, that transition. We have to, in New South Wales, we have 5 of our large coal-fired power stations retiring. We need to invest in a renewable energy infrastructure, and we need to do that delivers us the lowest cost renewable energy. So like a lot of our counterparts on the call, Australia is blessed with renewable energy resources, and we're putting down the policy framework to make sure that we have the right settings to get that cheap renewable electricity and drive those costs down. Our chief scientist then undertook a study to understand what are the opportunities for New South Wales if we have a very low renewable energy price and input in our system, and what opportunities that provides. And of course, hydrogen was a key, was throughout that document. Then leads us to the Net Zero Industry and Innovation Program. So this was I suppose a foundation of funding of $750 million that enables us, that is really looking to how do we invest now in order to make those 2030 goals, and importantly set up our industries so they can reach net zero by 2050. So all of that consideration has underpinned a kind of approach that we are considering for hydrogen, and this aligns with the national hydrogen strategy, and really that we need a somewhat of a phased approach, but the point is we really need to be able to scale up quickly. So the idea is that we are investing, we're going to be as government investing heavily. We've already committed a minimum amount of $70 million into the creation of hubs. And the idea is we focus on areas that are most economic now, but really to enable us to lay those foundations to scale quickly, to be able to set up two-way trading partners that can access that export market, as well as other hydrogen-enabled products in the future. So our strategy will look at how in the first phase we do that, and a key pillar of that is linking to this innovation program. So this is really the funding support that underpins this transition. And as you can see, it's got three key streams. It has a $380 million to deploy low emissions technologies, including hydrogen. And this is to how do we get to green steel? How do we green our ammonia production sites in New South Wales? We have $195 million to ensure that we're adopting the latest technologies in this transition, and including improvements in electrolyzer technologies, and being able to make sure that we are reducing the time to commercialization for those technologies that will reduce the input and price of delivered hydrogen. And then we have the $175 million for the new foundations. And this is where we have had already committed at least $70 million for the production of two hydrogen hubs in the Hunter and the Illawarra, but we'll also support across the state, which I'll go into now. So the hydrogen hub development concept. So we have announced the $70 million commitment. We have not launched the expression of interest. So the program is not yet open. So it's a really good opportunity for people on the call to be involved in the creation of a hydrogen economy in New South Wales and be part of that journey. So we are really looking from a demand aggregation approach to help build scale quickly. The idea is that we choose strategic locations such as the Hunter and the Illawarra, which have existing potential offtakes, that have existing appropriate infrastructure, that enable the multiple uses of hydrogen to build up the scale of a project that gets us down that hydrogen cost curve. Importantly, we haven't forgotten about unlocking new hydrogen demand in New South Wales, and we believe this will be done through the heavy transport sector. So we're looking at how we can lay down the refueling infrastructure in New South Wales that will unlock a significant proportion of hydrogen, local hydrogen demand. In order to make what we are doing, we understand the role of government can help facilitate. That's why we have the Investment New South Wales, as well as our trade commissioners that are working to help make sure we close the dots, and we are creating a environment where hydrogen players, whether they're investors, technology partners, whether they're project managers, whether they are research and development, whether they're off-takers, can have a space in which they can connect to sophisticated hydrogen players and build consortia for these projects. So the idea is we will be releasing this collaboration platform in the next couple of weeks, and so we encourage everybody on this call to be part of that collaboration platform, because that'll provide the basis for when we launch our EOI, you can be in a position to be able to be part of a project that gets funding across that supply chain. So we will, that is of course open to international participants. We expect that there will be the requirement, as Tim mentioned, for both technology transfer, knowledge transfer, but as well as having, as well as being able to set up the scaling capabilities to be able to reach that export market in the second phase of in the second half of this decade. Our timelines, as I mentioned, we are looking to release our strategy along with this EOI in the fourth quarter of this year. And so we'll have applications open in November and close by the end of January. So that's why we really encourage the interaction with this collaboration platform with organisations that are on this call to start building up those projects and putting yourselves in a position to be able to be part of that hydrogen journey. with New South Wales. So we expect after, and we'll close those applications by March 2022 and expect to have hydrogen produced in those hub locations by first quarter 2023. I think I just used maybe a minute over, but I do appreciate everyone's attention. And of course, if there are any questions, please reach out to Eugene or Mike Newman or Ron Green and the team, or of course ourselves directly. So there is, we really, as New South Wales government, want to encourage the interaction with us, and we're open for those interactions and to get these projects off the ground. Many thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Tim and Tim. All the participants. Actually, we have only one more presentation to go for the workshop. So, in case you have any questions to the speakers, please direct your questions to us using the chatting box located on the bottom right of your screen. Now, let me invite Queensland State Government's Andrew Broadbent to talk about Queensland hydrogen industry strategy. Andrew Broadbent is the director for the Queensland State Government Industry Development Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Development and Planning. Yeah. Over to you, Andrew.
So, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. It's really interesting to see the presentations from other states and the extensive activity that's happening in Australia in relation to the hydrogen space. I'd just like to cover first a bit of the strategic setting, which has been touched on today, but it's probably important that it's one of the few areas, the hydrogen industry development, where there's such common agreement and common direction across both state and territory governments and the national government in relation to the role that hydrogen can play in the achievement of emissions reductions going forward. So it's very unusual. And the other thing that's probably important to note is there's very, as well as cross-government support, there's very significant private sector interest in the opportunity that hydrogen can play in emissions reductions. The Queensland Resources Council, for example, recently surveyed their constituents, and there's a very high proportion of the industry that in the resources space, for example, that is looking at opportunities for hydrogen to play a role in their decarbonisation agenda. So the Queensland Hydrogen Strategy was released in May 2019. Very similar to the other states and territories, there's 5 focus areas, 17 initiatives within it. I think, so I'll cover off the innovation, private sector investment and policy frameworks a little bit later on. But in relation to building community awareness and confidence, we've focused heavily on demonstration projects to highlight for the public the opportunity in the for safe and sustainable renewable hydrogen to play a role in a whole range of applications across the ecosystem. In relation to skills, there's been significant investment by the Queensland government in infrastructure to support particularly the qualifications for technicians to be able to be available when private sector proponents are looking for the detailed qualified technicians to install equipment, as well as the participation by Queensland in the broader national skills qualifications development. So while the Queensland Hydrogen Strategy was only released in 2019, we did have one of the first hydrogen-powered buildings, which is the research centre out at University. I know that a number of delegates through the H2Korea-led industry trip in 2019 attended that site. One of the a couple of key things to note. The Premier released our strategy in 2019, the National Hydrogen Strategy released in rounds of the Hydrogen Industry Development Fund, which is one of the targeted industry funds we have. So we had a $15 million funding round back in 2019, excuse me, which was also recently topped up. The second round of that closed in June this year, and that was another $10 million round. We had the appointment of a hydrogen minister in late 2020 as well, so Minister De Brenny. There's also an assistant minister for hydrogen industry development as well, Assistant Minister McCallum. I understand that there was a significant interest from a number of the participants in relation to funding programs that might be available. There's a $2 billion, Australian $2 billion Queensland Renewable Energy and Hydrogen Jobs Fund, which was announced as part of the recent Queensland budget. And that's focused on the government-owned corporations in Queensland and the opportunities for them to link with private sector proponents in relation to both renewable energy and hydrogen projects. Since the release of the hydrogen strategy, we've had very substantial, private sector investment interest, and obviously everyone's aware that hydrogen is an extremely versatile energy carrier. Once it's produced, it can be used for a whole range of applications. The majority of the investment interest in Queensland at this stage is in the renewable energy space as the pathway to production of hydrogen. But we also do have emerging interest in the biomass pathway for hydrogen as well. Very similar to most of the other states and territories, we have very similar investment activity across a whole range of the different applications of hydrogen. One which we do have in Queensland where there's particular opportunities is in the remote area car space. We have a very extensive network of both remote communities and also very long transmission network. And there's significant interest in relation to the opportunity for hydrogen to play a role in decarbonising those networks. I don't expect that anyone will be able to see this slide, but I did want to include it because I think it demonstrates the extensive range of private sector investments from the tip of Cape York all the way down to the New South Wales border, and a very extensive range of uses of hydrogen as well. So various transport applications, the integration of hydrogen into the transmission network, all the way through to large-scale export. So the other element probably which I would like to just elaborate a little bit on is the way we're approaching the strategic planning for the hydrogen industry. There's a very significant transformation that's available through hydrogen in terms of the whole energy system. We are gathering information from individual projects in terms of what their potential scale of opportunity is, their requirements for infrastructure. We're also looking at it in terms of, similar to the New South Wales is looking in terms of across for example, the freight task, what the opportunities are in a domestic sense. We are integrating all that information to try and get a holistic view in terms of what the opportunities are, and also then to inform the strategic infrastructure planning that is required. As many of you on the call will be more than aware, the scale of some of the particularly export-focused projects in terms of their requirements for renewable energy and for sustainably available water are extremely significant in the overall context of strategic planning. There's obviously also work in relation to what the port infrastructure requirements might be. So we're very keen to hear from individual proponents in relation to what their proposals look like so that we can integrate that into a broader understanding of what the future strategic planning requirements would be and informing state infrastructure strategies and things like that. Some of the work, for example, as an example that's been undertaken or is underway at the moment, we're commissioning some work around the gas dispersion or liquid hydrogen dispersion at the kind of large scales that are being proposed, which is starting to stretch the current modelling capacity of the safety and risk experts. We're also using information from proponents, and this is the Port of Gladstone as an example, to undertake the land use suitability assessment requirements that integrates the infrastructure available, as well as informing what future infrastructure requirements, what future infrastructure may be required. That, sorry, I should just say this report is not public yet, but will be coming out shortly, and I'll be more than happy to send the information through H2Korea or Austrade in relation to when that becomes available. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the projects in Queensland and some of the, particularly those where there's a connection with the Korean businesses and industry. So this is the Sir Samuel Griffith Centre out at Nathan campus of Griffith University. We do have, we're very fortunate in Southeast Queensland to have a number of the not only leading researchers in the hydrogen space, but also leading research institutes. Queensland University of Technology, the University of Queensland, and Griffith University in particular have particular capabilities in relation to hydrogen research and are very active, particularly in the international collaboration space. Sun Metals Corporation, which most of you on the call will be familiar with. So they were one of the successful projects through the Hydrogen Industry Development Fund. They're progressing a domestic project with future long-term export ambitions. Initial focus will be on hydrogen trucks. So I think the heavy vehicles is a particular area in Australia for opportunities for decarbonisation. This is Utilitas Recarbon. So again, Recarbon have connections with Doosan. They're undertaking a project up at Bundaberg, which is one of the biogas projects which I have mentioned before. Is one of the emerging projects which is looking at biomass as a mechanism to produce hydrogen. Their initial focus is on using it for council waste collection trucks. This was a very exciting one when we were asked to assist with this one, and this was in relation to assisting them with regulatory streamline. So Hover UAV are down the Gold Coast, the partners are Doosan Mobility Innovation, and I guess that it was quite revealing for us that we thought we'd seen just about every possible use of hydrogen, but then the use of hydrogen in drones as a range extension, we were pretty excited to assist them in whatever way we could. Another project is just local BOC, the local one of the local gas suppliers in southeast Queensland. We have just had the first of the Hyundai Nexos come into the government fleet. So that'll be a 3-year trial, and that was important in terms of assisting BOC with their project to store the electrolyser down at the Bull Island facility. So that's the first sort of green hydrogen production for commercial sales. I did want to talk a little bit about what we do in terms of obviously facilitating private sector investment is one of the key elements of the strategy. The international collaboration and investment opportunities. So we're seeing emerging interests between Queensland consortia and international companies. very similar to what's happened historically in the mining and the LNG industry. So our Trade and Investment Queensland office in Korea is obviously very active in that space. For companies that are looking for assistance, there's case management, the project facilitation, and that'll cover all sorts of elements. So site suitability, access to land. We have commercial business units that that can identify and market land. There's a range of financial programs, and I guess it's a case of, rather than saying here are the grant programs that are available, it's better to flip it around and say you come to us in terms of what your project looks like, and the government will consider those not only in the context of what programs are available at the moment, but also the potential for one-off grants. So we deal a lot with companies on an individual basis to try and assist them through both financial and non-financial mechanisms. That's, for example, connecting with business partners. And then there's, obviously, it's a relatively complex space, the development of the hydrogen industry still, with new challenges in the regulatory space. We're learning all the time, and we're very pleased to work with companies to assist them through the regulatory process. The broader policy reform framework. So again, I think everyone's highlighted the importance of a streamlined regulatory framework. We're obviously very aware of the importance of the National Guarantee of Origin process, so the hydrogen certification, and the importance of that for international customers or international partners. And those practical demonstrations, because there's a very important to be able to take the community with us on the hydrogen journey. So there's certainly information available on our website.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd like to thank you all the speakers on behalf of the audience. Now it's time for the Q&A session. So let me hand over to the Rowan Petz, today's moderator for the session. Rowan.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be working with Austrade today and moderating today's Q&A session. We do have a few questions here. I see a question from POSCO International and a few others from our guests today. I think due to the complexity of some of the questions we have today, I think it's the best approach is that we'll take the questions and submit them to our guest speakers and get a collective response and send them to all the attendees at today's session.
Okay. If it's the case, can I ask Mr. Ron Green to wrap up this workshop with your closing remarks?
So thanks, Bong Sok, and thanks, speakers. I didn't want to cut the questions short, but I do think it's hard for people to respond to these, and I think each jurisdiction will have different information that they want to share, as well as the federal government. So unless there's disagreement, and I'd also like to suggest if there's anything that anybody else would like to raise, I'll just go to closing comments. So just I'll leave it for a moment, unless anybody want to raise anything. If not, I'm conscious of time. An hour and a half on a video conference is tough for anybody. So unless, is there any comments? If not, I'd just like to move to some of the things that I observed during this presentation. It was a bit of a concern. So I'm really pleased that this is a Team Australia approach to the way this was presented. I thank the speakers greatly for that attempt. There was no sort of competition. I think each state has its own particular permutations on what they're doing. I think the common theme about export with domestic coupling, whatever jurisdiction you're talking to, there's that opportunity. So that's an important thing for certainly the Koreans, to investors, parties, to see that there is domestic immediate opportunities, whether it's New South Wales transport, the new gas project that New South Wales looking at gas power generation, those sorts of opportunities with domestic, with export opportunities. The other thing I think is, and it's inevitable, the enormous amount of government work that is going on at every level of every state. Some particular peculiarities. I thought the South Australian modelling tool is excellent, and I don't know how much uptake there's been on that, but I do want to encourage people to look at that and express an interest. The West Australian scale of what they're doing, whether it's the Australian Renewable Energy Hub or the subsequent project that Carolyn mentioned, is quite significant. So lots of things to pay attention to there. The New South Wales rapid transition from out of coal and the adoption of the 4 renewable energy zones, $70 million towards the hub and the collaboration platform that they're going to launch in the next few weeks, it seems. And, you know, the amount of leads that are going on in the Queensland government with Queensland, the activity with some metals, biogas, etc., it's quite surprises me. So that's all very good information and new information, I think, to many of the listeners. I want to just also highlight again that we've got hopefully a Korea Australia announcement coming up at the G20 covering our low emissions technology partnership, which will lead to private and government funding for a significant project in Australia. And I ask you to continue to pay attention on what's happening in that space. The next workshop will be November the 10th, and I encourage all people to participate in this, not just the other speakers from the States, but also the existing speakers today. And we will be bringing in Boston Consulting or H2Korea to report on their Korea international value chain work that's been going on over the last few months. They should be able to report on that by November the 10th. So that's sort of where I'd like to leave it, unless there's any dissent. And I do thank everybody for keeping to the timelines of today. And I'd also like to thank, of course, H2Korea. It was great that Andrew, I think, did he put up the photograph of their H2Korea's visit to Australia in 2019? So that was a great signal to everybody that this engagement has been going on for some years, and there's a lot more potential to come as well. So again, thank you for your attention during the last hour and a half.
Okay, and Dr. Kwon, please provide your last minute comments.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was able to learn about the Australian hydrogen industry and the project being carried out in each state through today's meeting. H2Korea will derive the information to Korean companies and support companies that want to cooperate with Australia. Korea is creating a value chain for hydrogen production, country and overseas hydrogen imports. Also, Korean companies with excellent technology want international cooperation, especially with Australia cooperation. We are looking forward to cooperation with Australia in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kwon.
Thank you, Dr. Kwon. Again, I'd like to express my great thanks to the all the speakers and all the audience, and I really look forward to meeting you all at the second Australia-Korea Hydrogen Industry workshop in November 10th. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.